Hello and welcome to Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. I'm Becky Parker Geist and I'm your host. Audiobook Connection is your place to learn about the audiobook creative process in discussions between the authors, narrators, producers, and post-production teams that bring them all together, as well as guests who have listened to the audiobooks and have questions for the creative teams. This podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. I have with me today Joan Nockels Wilson, the author of The Book of Timothy, The Devil, My Brother, and Me, a memoir, and Tim Nockels, Joan's brother, whose story is being told. Joan Nockels Wilson is a writer and a senior assistant attorney general for the state of Alaska. She has served the state of Alaska in both a civil and criminal capacity for more than half of her 25-year legal career. And Tim was the first of Father John Baptist Ormaché's victims to come forward, and the only one to do so publicly. As president and owner of Pure Soul Inc., he advises Morgan Stanley on the pricing and execution of euro-dollar options and trades on the floor of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. Joan and Tim, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Becky.
So, Joan, let's start with you. First of all, how did it feel hearing this very personal story being told in another voice?
It felt like I was listening to someone else's story. And I have to tell you, when I listened, even though I wrote it, Maria was so compelling, I wanted to know what happened next. So
cool.
It was a debate as a writer, whether to provide it in my own voice, which, a lot of memoirists say they like to do. But once I was able to listen to Maria and hear her capture not only me, but Tim, but the myriad of side characters. I mean, her ability to differentiate and tell a story through voice alone, that's something that is remarkable and something that is nowhere within my bandwidth. So the answer is 100% happy.
Yeah, awesome. And so, Tim, did listening to the audiobook of this story, did that allow you to experience it differently than you had before?
Yeah, like I said, I listened briefly just to sort of summarize myself and understand exactly what audio rendition would come through as. And I sort of agree with Joan. Although, unfortunately, I lived it, I think it helped me a little bit, actually, to, I don't know, it got my mind into more of being in Joan's shoes, from her being the author. Obviously, if I went to Rome, the ending would have been different. But outside of that, it was I loved it. It was really interesting.
And so I want to just ask a few questions, if I may, about your history that is told in this story. But were you aware at the time of the abuse of other boys being in your situation?
That's a really good question. At the time, I think I was very young, when it started. It was almost a 4-year span, just before, like in mostly grade school, and then maybe a touch into my freshman year of high school. But most of it was, I think the monster sort of knew that I was onto him. I was staying away from home. Unfortunately, it was to, drink alcohol and dabble in drugs just to sort of shelter from the pain. But I don't know if I really thought about the other boys at the time. Obviously, 2 were actually very good friends of mine. And that's just how different maybe boys, that are being hurt tend to stay quiet. They don't want to, they don't want their peers to know, their friends to know that things sexually is happening to them.
Right.
So unfortunately, you keep it to yourself. I wish it could have been different. We could have all gotten together back then. And, once I told my parents, and unfortunately didn't believe me, only because of, the trouble I was causing. They thought I was essentially just making up an excuse because of all the trouble I was in. But I mean, the abuse caused the trouble.
Right.
And I mean, it's almost impossible if your parents, if you can't even talk to your parents, how are you going to talk to your friends?
Right. Right. Yeah. No, that it makes
Becky,
sense.
can I add in there that groomers count on that? I mean, that's their modus operandi, to isolate children and make them feel, first, like they're the only one in the world that deserves this attention. And second, that nobody's going to believe you if you come forward.
Right.
So I remember sitting in the car driving Tim and one of the other boys to high school, looking at the back seat. You know, they were probably going through it at the exact same time and had no idea.
Yeah. Yeah. It's helpful, I think, for those that we hope will become attentive to recognize that fact, I think. And can you tell us, like, how did the abuse begin?
I think once my dad was working for the church as the head maintenance, and obviously the abuse began with the getting through my dad and making sure that my dad was comfortable working there and paying him well. And, he basically had, 6 kids that were looking to go through Catholic school, which is extremely expensive. And on Chicago firefighters' pay back then, it's hard to imagine how he did that, but that's where JB came in. He established, payments to these Catholic schools for us.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's the grooming right there.
Right.
Take some of the financial burden away from the family. Automatically you're deemed a friend. Come to dinner and things like that. I don't think the abuse actually started at my house. It started at the church as an altar boy, where, he would, or in his office, he closed the door and start to hug me and kiss me. And then, I was extremely uncomfortable. I don't understand how he thought I was enjoying myself. I was more or less just a piece of meat, just a security blanket to him is the only way I can think of it. And then once, he started to get a little bit more aggressive and come to the house and close my bedroom door and sit in my room for, it felt like hours.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure it was hours. It just, he just wanted to get over. I don't even know if any words were said. I don't remember. I just turned into I don't know, just an object.
Right.
And it's hard to explain, I think.
Yeah. Had you blocked out the memory of the abuse for a time, or, because I know that can happen, or was it always present with you?
I have a feeling I have. Some of the things that, some of the touching was definitely a little bit more than I probably portrayed, but it's just my way of, getting through and living my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Becky, in my research and review, I don't really think the boys block it out. I think they compartmentalize. In our block of who we are as humans, you take this block and you diminish it. So I think they always carry it with them. And that's how people survive in a variety of ways, either never talking about it or going into the box.
Right. Yeah. And so at that moment when you knew you had to speak out, can you tell us about that?
Yeah. My wife had just told me that, we're finally pregnant, and we were trying for a while. We were actually going through forms of, what's it called?
Hormone therapy or?
Yeah. Things like that. And, we were having some issues early on, but, once it, she told me she was pregnant, and, it was maybe just timing, maybe God's way of saying, you have to do something. Because all those boys in Boston, it was a huge article. You couldn't help but it was everywhere. It was on the newspaper. It's national news. And I knew I couldn't be a good father if I didn't try to get that guy, that monster, away from kids.
Yeah.
That was my one job. And I wasn't going to fail.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, and
That's it.
also for all that you have been doing and, and going through as a part of making a difference in the world for many children. So, Joan, let's go over to you. And, you've done a lot of research, obviously, in preparation for this book. And also in thinking about your own family, and from your perspective, what do you wish your parents had noticed? And Tim, I'll ask you this afterwards, but what do you wish that your parents or family had noticed, and what do you wish they had done about it?
I'm still trying to figure this out, Becky, how the children of our parish knew something was off with this guy, but our parents, the teachers, the nuns seemed oblivious to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I just recall him coming out to the playground during our recess when we were at grammar school, and the glint in his eye when he was around boys, and the way he pulled them into these bear hugs, pretending to be jostling, but combine that with what looked like sexual pleasure. Now, I was a 13-year-old girl. I didn't know what that was, but I saw my parents hug each other and love each other. It kind of looked like that.
Mm.
And then probably the biggest thing for me, which has been, what I've spent my good 20 years of my life doing, is that closed bedroom door. I close my eyes and I can see it. And how a parent ever thought that was okay, even a 1970s parent, is one I still haven't found a good answer to. So those are the two things. And I remember talking to my dad about, I think this guy is a little off. And he's like, oh, he's just, got a lot of love for Jesus. That's why he's off.
Tim, anything you would want to add?
I think, obviously, like up until, I think, 6th grade. So 5th grade is, too early. I was a very good athlete. I was a decent student. And then 6th grade, I was drinking, not doing drugs yet, but drinking, getting into trouble. My grades absolutely nosedived. I was staying out until 1 o'clock in the morning because I saw his car parked in front of my house on school days. If you think about 6th grade, I was, what is that? 12 years old?
13.
Yeah.
12 years old on a school night, staying out until 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Drinking beer in a field by yourself.
With probably some missing beer from the house. Sorry, Tim.
Waiting for that car to leave so you can go to bed and go to school.
Mm-hmm.
I would assume I'm a parent now. I would notice that. I don't understand how that's not noticed.
Right. A big shift in
right there. That should have been an absolute, I think if I was going to mentor, parents on, what to look for.
Yeah.
That's exactly what to look for. If your kid starts reacting in ways that he wasn't doing 3 months ago, sit him down and find out what's going on.
Right.
If he says nothing, believe him. But if he says something, believe him again.
And kind of the greatest irony of that situation was, as Tim was getting more troubled, they brought the priest in to counsel him and relieve the trouble. So
oh dear,
the source of the trouble was brought into the bedroom.
Wow. That's like double intensity.
It's like throwing gasoline on a fire.
Right. Joan, I know that both of your parents had died before this book came out. Did you have the ability to share it with them?
because it's been a labor of love, for this book, I shouldn't call it, obviously the subject is not, but working on it for so long. Yes. So my mother read it in a couple of days, wrote me a beautiful note as she was reading it. She had still some limitations with being able to grasp the subject. And I could kind of talk about that, about my mother had a good ability to excise things in order for it to fit the narrative. My father spent the last 10 years of his life in a living penance for denying his own son, and health condition after health condition led to his eventual death. But I do know my mother would tell me he would take the manuscript and his vision was fading and take a magnifying glass and read it. I'm not sure he finished it, but and he never actively talked to me about it. But knowing how they were during the journey, my effort to go to Rome to find this guy, we have his support.
And I know that you reference in the acknowledgments that you've forgiven them for their complicity. Can you talk a little bit about that process?
Tim's got a good answer to this too. He was much kinder than I was. Forgiveness comes, I think, in part being a parent yourself and realizing you spend this effort trying to do the best you can for your child. Right now with modern technology, what is my daughter exposed to every time she picks up her phone? That's one of my biggest fears.
Right.
Forgiveness comes in not being able to call your mom and ask how her day is going, or your dad and how he's feeling. Forgiveness comes in realizing that while they were complicit, the very reason Tim could make his name public and I could go to Rome is because they created us. They taught us what it means to stand up for what you believe in, and gave us, through a loving home, at least through them, the strength of self to be who we are. So I haven't forgiven the act of leaving my brother to be laid waste to, but I have forgiven the people that have given me the gift of life.
And Tim, do you want to respond to that?
The difference between forgiveness, if I was going to say forgiveness that comes from the church, the archdiocese, and passionate priests, came in the form of a letter, and on the typed out my name, they spelt it wrong. Their letter of forgiveness didn't spell my name, so that's the form of apology that they render. The apology from my parents is completely different. It's looking in my eyes and saying, "Tim, I'm so sorry." That's all they had to do. I forgave them instantly. I just wanted to hear it. They said it. They meant it. And I love them.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. Let's pause for a moment. We'll be right back.
Getting your memoir into audio can be a delicate process, best treated with a nurturing and supportive approach. Many authors assume that when a memoir is recorded, it needs to be in the author's voice. And while sometimes that is best, it is not always the best option. At Pro Audio Voices, we'll work through that decision with you and support you in the production process, whichever way you choose. If you decide to narrate, we set you up for success with a range of options, from having an audio engineer and director on the line for every recording session, to getting you properly set up for recording on your own. If we hire a professional narrator, we'll make sure the voice is the right fit for you and your memoir. At Pro Audio Voices, your story is important to us. Let's inspire the world together.
And if the reader would compare that with the forgiveness, with the apology, I should say, Ormache offered to me, you know that had no heart behind it.
Yeah, I'm not a glass of spilt milk.
You are not.
Mm-hmm. No. What would you like to say to other children or their parents or guardians who may be either in a position where there is some concern about an abusive situation that may be happening? Is there something that you would like to, let's start off with other young people. What would you like to say to them?
It would be hard I work with special needs. I think that's maybe secretly one of the reasons that I work with special needs is I'm terrified of things like this. And if you don't have a voice, a lot of autistics don't verbalize. And it's real easy to abuse somebody like that because they don't know how to tell them to stop, and they don't know how to ask for help. So I think that's one of the reasons I actually started doing that, just to be that safeguard. But others, obviously, my first thing would, find an adult you trust and explain to them what's going on. If they don't believe you, shake them, rattle them, make them listen, ask them for help. They still don't help, then find somebody else and keep looking. Never stop.
Joan, you had made a point about your parents raising you in a way that allowed you to be able to speak out. Obviously, some time went by before, Tim, you were in a position where you felt you could. But even now, being able to speak out as an adult.
Yeah. No, I know what you're saying. Like hindsight, if I didn't tell my parents and I told my Uncle Dan, it would have been over in 10 minutes. Literally. That you just got to find the right person. If you're scared of your dad or you're scared of your mom, then find that uncle, find that family member that you trust.
And I think that's why his death, I know it impacted me, but you must have felt completely alone when we lost him.
Oh, yeah. I was ready to end it after that.
So for parents, what I'm hearing is helping make sure that your kids have some trusted adult in their lives that is not the parent themselves, because that can be intimidating. It can be just too scary, regardless of the relationship. There should always be at least one other trusted person.
I think that's a fair bit of advice. And right now I'm parenting a 13-year-old, and there are things I know she doesn't want to talk to me about. So having a safe harbor and really ensure that person is a safe harbor
is truly, right, truly a safe harbor.
It's important.
Yeah. Clearly, the child should have a say in, or is a safe harbor is only going to be a truly safe harbor if the child feels safe with that person. And so making sure that that's part of it.
And Becky, your questions make a good point, which is this is still going on.
Right.
And I think because, the Catholic scandal, hit its height in 2002 with this Boston Spotlight article, and the church came out with the Dallas Charter. People think, oh, this is yesterday's problem. It's not yesterday's problem. It's still today's problem. And Tim and I can tell you that from being on tour with our book, the people who come up to us in private and still talk about it. So.
And sadly, it's not a problem that is only within the Catholic Church. Right. Any abusive situation, they can come in all forms, in all places, all kinds of relationships. So I think that the message here is so important. And if someone within the Catholic Church were listening, what would you like them to know? Joan, you want to?
My answer is going to be different than Joan's. Go ahead.
Okay.
All right. Let's hear from both of you. Go ahead, Joan.
Victims, and let me restate that, people who've been victimized by priests, because people are not victims. People survive this. And the people that love them. I know this from my ongoing effort to try to remain Catholic. We're not wanted anymore. Aren't you done with this? We're the stain that they try to cover up with a really nice carpet, new Catholics who don't have this history. They should realize that every time you go to Mass and you hear a prayer for priests and the vocation, and you don't hear a equally compelling prayer for victims, you're being re-victimized. So if anyone were to listen, when I'm apologetic for things I do wrong, I get on my knees everything I can without, if a person's willing to accept me, and don't give up. Know that, you still want to feel loved. I always call myself the Catholic clinging to the edge of a window. I still want someone to pull me a little back in to say I'm still worth having. And nobody's done that. And that's why I can only enter Catholic churches alone, because I know nobody is there. So that's my answer of a person who still tries to be Catholic.
I guess in a layman's Catholic's, understanding of God and the church, and then their people, and then Satan, and then Satan's people. Mine is God, the people, Satan, the church, is under Satan. They have to get through Satan to get to the people. God's out of their reach. As far as I'm concerned, the entire Catholic archdiocese is a drug cartel. Their only scheme is to make money. The richer and more power they get, the better. I am very happy to be done with them. I'm very happy that they will never sink their claws into my boys. I'm completely washed my hands of them. I have the strongest relationship with God now that I've ever had before in my life. I basically took out, they consider themselves the middleman. I've fired the middleman. My relationship with God is my own. I can be mad at my God. I can, swear at my God, but that's a healthy relationship. I don't need anyone else getting in the way. And I just feel I'm a better man having that ability. Obviously, I don't feel, any ill will towards, people that remain Catholic. Of course, I'm friends with a million of them, or not a million, you know what I mean, though. A lot of them.
Yeah.
I don't think badly about them. If they go to church and they want to raise their family like that, go ahead. That's not my place. It's not my family. If my boys said, I want to go to church, I would let them. I don't see that happening, but obviously, Papa Bear has his eyes on them, but it would be a completely different story. Like I said, that's just the way I feel about them. I feel cleaner without them. They don't want me back. They couldn't care less.
I suspect your answers are going to be quite different on this one too. Do you think the Catholic Church is redeemable?
No, absolutely not. Not with the current leadership. They continue. They continue. I mean, my abuser has a room with a view in Rome. That's punishment. As far as what happens to pedophiles in Illinois, downtown Chicago, it's a little different.
Yeah, that aren't
story.
Protected.
Once they get to jail, that's where they belong. So I mean that's the difference between a pedophile priest and a pedophile.
Mm-hmm. And Joan,
one of the reasons I still call myself a Catholic is there's something about saying the words about Jesus Christ that people of the first century said, that things that Peter or Paul taught to small congregations are things I can still read 2,000 years later. And my favorite story is always the angry Jesus, the Jesus who goes into his father's temple and sees the merchants and lays into them. And to me, that's what Jesus has to do to the Catholic Church. And the current leadership is not listening. And I agree with Tim, irredeemably can't listen. But as I recount in the book, the early Christian church, and I use Christian and not Catholic in that setting, women had a voice, slaves had a voice. Anyone who could believe in the miracle of this person who died for us had a voice. If the Catholic Church can go back to the first century Catholic Church, it's redeemable. And there's the saying in the Bible, all things are possible with God. So I have to believe that. Do I think it'll happen in my lifetime or my daughter's lifetime? No. Do I think the odds of it happening are high? No, they're very, very low. But I'm not going to give up the hope of it.
And so your book leaves us back in 2012. Is there anything that you would like your listeners to know about your journeys going forward, or any changes that you see taking place that are encouraging, or any lack of change you find discouraging? What are you seeing now?
Tim, you want to go first on that?
So go ahead.
Well, I have to say, and this is completely off subject, but I am beyond happy that the Cubs have won the World Series, because I end the book 4 years before that happened. And as a lifetime fan, nothing can, replace that. And that's why it's mentioned in my acknowledgments that I'm a joyous Cubs fan. Since 2012, the parts of the journey that I think are important is, I end the book at a graveside for my dog named after my grandfather. And I'm praying in that moment for a God who will be able to help me teach my child the boundless love I once received from the Catholic Church. And I can tell you that, that's happening, that I have a daughter that is stronger than I am, has resilient faith, not only in God, but in herself. And I'm grateful every single day for that. As for my journey with the Catholic Church, I mentioned, I think in the epilogue, that you might see me sneaking in for Mass, and that's happened a couple times. But interestingly, this book tour has separated me even more from the Catholic Church. And probably the keenest event is when I walked in St. Aloysius Gonzaga's church on Gonzaga University Chapel, and the church was empty. And I went up to the altar for the Virgin Mary, and I found a book of prayers for the deceased. And that book of prayers contained the names of about 10 Jesuit child predators. This was last month. They have no hope. They have no heart. So I said I'm clinging to the ledge, but I'm about to fall off. That said, I'm falling onto soft ground, because as Tim says, I just need to cut out the middleman.
My relationship with God is stronger than ever. And it is really, really, it's very true. It's warm. It's warming. And I feel loved. All I have to do is look at the pictures in my house, and my two incredible boys, and my wife. God had a plan. He figured out that happy ending for me. I thank him for it.
Again, this is Joan Nockels Wilson, author of The Book of Timothy, The Devil, My Brother and Me, a memoir, and Tim Nockels, Joan's brother, whose story is being told. The audiobook is narrated by Maria Marquis. And visit joannockelswilson.com for more information. Joan and Tim, thank you so much for taking the time to be with me today, and for all your willingness to be vulnerable, and for all that you're doing in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky.
You're welcome, and thank you for helping this story continue, Becky.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us for Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. Please take a moment to subscribe at audiobookconnection.com. The podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Learn more at proaudiovoices.com. Again, thanks for being with us, and please join us next week.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.